Okay, cool. Hi, welcome people at home. Okay, everybody in here, you're gonna be nice and quiet so we don't do this. Yes, well, man. Can you do what? Absolutely. Okay, what else we got here? Patriot advantages. These guys, again, just like anybody else, I said anyone can win a fight as long as they look and say, what have I got? What kind of a fight do I need to fight in order to win this thing? Like the example I gave is, I don't know, if you take somebody like Riley and me, well, Riley's going to be faster. She's smaller. She can move around. She's more agile. So right off the bat, you take a look at the two of us and say, oh, Mr. Holman's going to win that fight. But it depends on if Riley's smart enough to say, no, I'm going to move quickly. I'm going to stay away and throw things at him. So what have we got here? The Patriot advantages. They did have some advantages. First of all, they were fighting for their own futures. They understood what was going on. First of all, that they were fighting for their liberty, for themselves, their children, their grandchildren, and that was important to them. But also, remember, they've committed treason, and if they lose, they may simply be hanged. So they're fighting for their own futures. Now think about the British guy. The British soldier, did you check in with the officer? Okay. The British soldier there, he might have come from London, and no matter what happens when this is over, he's going to go back. The king will still be the king. Parliament will still be parliament, and he'll still just be a grunt in the army. So his future isn't at stake in the British army, but the Americans' future is. Well, they were masters of frontier and forest. Now this is big. Lots of people don't realize, some of you do, but lots of people don't realize just how frightening the wild is. To most people who have grown up in cities and towns and civilized places, just being out in the wild is incredibly scary. I read something a couple of years ago that just blew my mind. And that is, you know, they lose people in the woods occasionally, and they'll get big search parties, and the search parties will go around, and the search parties will call people's names. Well, after about 36 hours, even adults will not usually answer to their own name. I could be standing here and Annalise could be on the other side of a tree and I could be saying, Annalise, Annalise. And she won't even answer because she's sitting there. She's so frightened by being out in the wilderness that she's saying, well, nothing is biting me right now and I'm not being eaten and I'm not being attacked. So I'm not going to make any noise and draw attention to myself. I'm just going to sit here. She just won't respond. She's that scared. So now you take these British soldiers from London or Cambridge or some big civilized town, and you bring them out and you put them in the wilderness. And out in the wilderness, this is a scary place for them. But most of the colonial soldiers were frontiersmen because that's what most of the colonies were. There was some wildness around there. They still hunted for their own food every day. They, for the most part, you know, were used to having the threat of Indians, which scared the bejeebers out of the British and the Americans, but they were used to the threat of the animals. They understood the animals, knew what kind of animals were out there, and these guys could go into the woods and make themselves shelter and find themselves food, where that might be a little strange for the British. They were veterans of the French and Indian War, and that means they already understood that idea of hide behind rocks and trees and shoot and run away, reload, go shoot again from behind a rock or a tree. And the British never stopped trying to fight the European style of war. The British really wanted to line up army versus army and shoot a lot of muskets at the same time. The Americans did have some more rifles than the British did. Eventually the British would get some rifles, but remember, if they wanted to resupply their army, they would have to buy tens of thousands of rifles. So they stuck with the big muskets. They stuck with the kind of weapon they knew and understood. And the Americans had much more accurate weapons. Not all of them, but some of them. Now, since you have a more accurate weapon, what would those people be able to do? Sawyer. Do what? Hit more shots. So who are they going to shoot? Which British? Yes. Hang on a second. We now take a sharpening break with Sawyer. Sawyer is apparently trying to ground up his entire pencil. Okay, here we go. Which British are they going to shoot?
One to the right.
Come on, come on. Which British are they going to shoot? Which ones? Who would you shoot? There's a whole army right over there. They go, oh, that guy. The officers. You shoot the officers. Now, the British would say, this is very unsporting. This is very uncivilized. And the Americans would say, yeah, you have a huge army, and if we shoot your officers, you're completely disorganized. You're much easier to beat. You know, like in present day, when people go into combat, like the American Army is in combat somewhere, not only do officers not wear any structure of rank, but they don't salute anybody. They don't salute when they're actually in a battle place. Why? If I walk up and we have Captain Riley Ryder over here, and I walk up and I say, yes, they're going to shoot her. I just saluted her. She's a higher rank. She's an officer. Boom, down she goes. So they don't want that to happen. And the same thing was true back then, but back then, you've seen some of these uniforms pictured. It's kind of crazy, all the ruffles and tags and badges, and because they really liked to look good when they went into battle. The last big advantage that the Patriots had was George Washington. Historians from all over the world, there was some society that took a vote, and we're talking about the most underrated and the most overrated generals in history, and George Washington came out on top as the most underrated. It's kind of an amazing thing because most people don't know this. George Washington lost almost every battle he fought. He was constantly defeated by the British, any number of the British. But what he did, what the true strength of George Washington was, he always managed to have his army survive and get away so they could continue to fight. Remember, for a long while, he had the only army. They catch him and kill him or catch him and capture him, it's over. So just being able to do that and keep the revolution going for 7 years was an amazing feat, and eventually, in war away, he won. Oh, sorry, I forgot I put this in here. This is actually a picture of Claire's future husband. All righty. Come on, come on. All right, new section. We got New York City, Trenton, and Princeton. Remember, guys, when we're talking, taking notes, when I'm describing something to you, if I say New York, I mean the entire almost triangular shaped colony or state, depending on your point of view. If I say New York City, I'm just talking about the city on the south end of the Hudson River. All right, this is New York City, and then Trenton and Princeton, New Jersey. All right. So let's begin here. You got it. Boom. The British took New York City. Remember the third expedition coming in? They won up in Quebec. They chased Benedict Arnold and the Americans away. So their first expedition was successful for the British. The second expedition went down to Charleston. And that one was unsuccessful because of Fort Moultrie and the Palmetto Fort. Then the third expedition came to New York City. This is General Howe himself. He's coming back from Canada. Remember, he had to abandon Philadelphia. Coming back from Canada, and he defeats the Americans at the Battle of Brooklyn Heights, August 27, 1776. I'm going to take this off so that I am heard by the people at home, I'm sure. Now, I put this picture up, and it's a building, a parking lot, a bunch of people out there kind of having a Saturday afternoon, because that's the battlefield. That's what it looks like now. I want you guys to realize that when we're talking about New York City, we're not talking about this giant behemoth of a city. If you remember when I read Our Lives, Our Fortunes, and Our Sacred Honor, right after we did the Declaration of Independence, that little essay to describe all about the people who signed the Declaration, some of them had lost their timberland in what was now Harlem. Harlem's a huge city, and that was woods. I mean, the crop was woods back then. So this is much, 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 much smaller. New York City was not the biggest city in the colony. All right. In September of 1776, the British moved in. They defeated George Washington at Brooklyn Heights, and then they continued their march into the city. Now, back over here so I can put this thing back on. All right. As the British came in one side of New York City, George Washington's army left out the other side. All right, they fought to the last minute, but they couldn't hold. The British overwhelmed and came in. What happened then was, of course, the time when an army is weakest, when it captures a city or wins a battle, is right afterwards, because then they have to get reorganized. They have to set up their own defenses and such. As a result, George Washington said, "Can I retake New York City?" Well, in order to do that, I need to know what the defenses of New York City are at present. So he asked for volunteers to go in and see what was happening. One of those volunteers was a man named Nathan Hale, a Connecticut captain, who's only about 19 years old. And Nathan Hale volunteered to go in. Now he had on his American Army uniform. He was a soldier in Washington's American Army, so he had a uniform on. But over the top of that, he put on a civilian overcoat, because you can't really walk into an enemy city wearing your uniform. So he put an overcoat on over, just a regular civilian overcoat. And he walked around making notes about what the defenses were. So, okay, I see some cannon over there. Okay, I see this flag. I know which unit this is, who their commander is, how many guys they have. I see they're building some ramparts over here. I see they've dug some trenches over there. He's making note of all of this. And as the Americans were leaving, they had set fire to part of New York City. And the British were really angry. Really, really angry, because they're coming in September. It's not long before it's winter. And they don't want to spend the winter in tents out in some field. What they thought would happen was they'd come into New York City and they would be able to get buildings to put their army into, but many of the buildings had been burned by the Patriots. The British are angry, so they send out soldiers to look for who it was that started the fire, see if they're still there. And the first people they look at are the people, the young men of military age. And so along the way, Nathan Hale is stopped. Nathan Hale's stopped by the British, and they're checking him out, and they open up the coat, and there's an American Army uniform. Okay, guess what you are? You're a spy. Well, I'm wearing my uniform, so I'm a combatant. That means I should be treated like a prisoner. They said, yeah, but it was covered. You're a spy. Spies are hanged. They're just not going to put up with that. So they took Nathan Hale, this 19-year-old guy, and they said, any last words before they hanged him? And he very famously said, I regret that I have but one life to lose for my country. Now, let me explain something to you. My dad died about 20 years ago. He was 79 years old, and it was sad. We felt a personal loss. But my dad had been in the Navy. He graduated from Harvard and Dartmouth. He had had a long career as an advertising executive. He had 5 kids. He had, at the time he died, I think something like 16 grandchildren and a couple of great-grandchildren. So he had lived a pretty full life. If I died today, not that I'm a better man than my father, but it might be a little sadder, because I've seen 2 of my grandchildren, but I've never seen 2 of my 3 sons married. I will never see their children. So I haven't really finished all the same things my father did. If Talal died today, it would be horrible, because he's never even driven a car legally. He's never even driven a car. He's not graduated from high school. He's never gone to a dance. He's never had a date. He's never gone to college, never graduated from college, never had a career, never had children, never had grandchildren, never had so much of what makes life so beautiful. And here's a 19-year-old guy, and he's saying, I only regret that I regret that I had but one life to lose for my country. I give more. That's how much I believe in this patriot cause. And he was aware of what was happening. They're going to kill him. He will never have the things that most people have in their lives. So he becomes the first real hero of the American Revolution, the first big American hero, Nathan Hale. Whoa, what do we do here? Okay. I hope this is still up. Why are you doing this? You're evil. Okay, now, this is supposed to control the volume. I should be able to touch this and get the volume. I do that no way. Okay, well, I'm hoping you'll be able to hear this, but it's not terribly important. It can't. Oh, is that it? I got these 14 fingers. Yeah, that's it. Okay. Okay. Here's the situation. George Washington, with at that time really the only American army, starts to retreat. The British have taken New York City, and the British wanted it for winter quarters. Part of it's been burned. And the British, after having fought a few battles there, stop. They don't follow up. All right, let's watch this. They stop too soon. This says, don't get cocky, runner loses after, really stop it too soon. But it's a CBSN film, you can get it on YouTube.
Yeah, maybe next time wait that extra second before celebrating. A college track star learned the dangers of premature celebration. Runner from the University of Oregon thought he had the race locked up, started waving, pumping up the crowd, and he was passed by a runner from the University of Washington in the final seconds, not just the final seconds, the difference was a tenth of a second. The University of Washington wins. Yeah, I just a bit of a disappointment there.
Okay.
He was like 3 steps ahead.
Yeah, maybe next
What are we
time
doing here?
that
How do we
extra
get too
second
small?
before celebrating. A college track star learned the dangers of premature celebration. Runner from the University of Oregon thought he had the race locked up.
Okay. There we go. The idea is I'm having a fight. I'm having a fight with some mean beast like, let's say, you want to be a fighter?
Sure.
Okay, we're having a fight. We're having a fight, and she manages to get in a lucky kick. We get all squared up. We're getting ready to punch it up right in the kneecap. And I go, ah. What should she do?
She should hit you again.
Hit me again. Pick up a chair. Throw a brick. Wrap a computer over my head. When is a fight finished? When the other person can't fight anymore. I always love that in movies. You know, it's like the person will go and go, boom, boom. Then what do? Back off. Like, what? It's your turn? If I'm hitting you and I'm still hitting you, I'm going to keep hitting you. That's a real fight. Not you hit me twice, now I hit you twice. Okay, we'll just, we keep hitting each other in the face. That's not a fight. That's stupid. The British made this huge mistake. They had Washington on the run. His people were disheartened, and they're heading off out of the city. And instead of chasing them and capturing what was then really about the only American army and the commander of all the American forces, they say, oh, darn it, let's get comfortable for the winter. Huge mistake on the part of the British. Washington, on the other hand, this is part of his genius. This is what he did so well. He said, all right, oh boy. People don't usually fight back then in winter. Let me throw this over there. The reason people don't go in winter, there we go. All this stuff we have, all these wonderful gloves and Gore-Tex, so you sweat and it comes out and you stay nice and dry, and all these layers of things. They didn't have that back then. They had dead animals. You can wrap yourself in a dead animal, Or you can stay by a fire, maybe get some wool. Wool's pretty good in the winter, and that's it. Other than that, you freeze. Plus, think about what you guys do when there's a snowstorm. All right? Dad gets the shovel or the snow blower, goes on. Good, it's your brother's job. Okay, brothers, moms, doesn't matter who does it. But somebody grabs the shovel, grabs the snow blower, they go out there. You have the equipment, there's not much to do. But back in the old days, you got to think about it. In town, the business owners and such might come out and shovel away the snow. I mean, they'll do it in front of their property. And the people in the houses might, build a lane out to the barn because they had to take care of the animals. But out in the countryside, it snows a foot. And there's just a foot of snow on the ground. And then it snows another 6 inches. Now there's 18 inches of snow. And it snows another foot. Now there's 2.5 feet of snow on there. And it keeps going all winter long with nobody clearing it. It's not long up in the northern part of the country, particularly where wagons can't move anymore. The bottom of the wagon's just going to be packed up next to the snow. Horses can't step over that. It's darn sure people can't. So armies couldn't move during the winter. Pretty much when they went into winter quarters, they kind of kept an eye out for each other, so there wasn't a surprise attack. But moving a whole army was kind of out of the question. Washington crossed the Delaware River just before it froze, right at Christmas time. Yes, sir. They would shovel from the house to the barn, and then they'd just stay inside. Well, you don't have a barn 2 feet away from the house? You mean 2 feet wide? Yeah, something like that. No, you'd shovel every time it snowed and keep your path open because a couple times a day you had to go out and milk a cow, feed the horses, so that they keep open. Right? Catch up. No, it had already snowed several times. It was winter. If you see the painting here, and it's not exactly realistic, but there's chunks of ice in the water. It was freezing. It wasn't frozen, but it was freezing. It was cold. Yes. It is. There we go. Yeah, I just got that. So I forgot about that. Here's Washington crossing the Delaware, featuring, what do you call these things?
Bobblehead.
Bobblehead.
Oh, no, Funko Pop.
Bumple Pop?
Funko Pop.
Funko. All right, these guys. Here he comes. There he is. Washington crossing the Delaware. Okay, cool. Visual aids. All right. So Washington crosses the Delaware, particularly to make an attack on some Hessians. There's a small Hessian post at Princeton. Excuse me, at Trenton, New Jersey. Small Hessian post at Trenton. And it's right at Christmas time. It's going to be the day before. and the Hessians are all over in America. And there is no mama. And there is no strudel. But it's Christmas. It's awful. So what do young men do in the army when they're really sad and lonely?
They cry and shoot people.
No, what do?
They eat.
They drink. Okay? So the Hessians had a bit of a Christmas cheer. The Hessians were mostly drunk. No, the Hessians are mostly drunk. Washington crossed the Delaware River so that he could have a surprise attack on them. They weren't ready for this. Now, it gives him an advantage. It gives him a couple of things. First of all, his people are now going to go into the winter not thinking, boy, we lost at Brooklyn Heights. Boy, we lost New York City. Instead, they're going to say, yeah, we took it to them at Princeton. Then he goes a little further, and he attacks down at Princeton. So Trenton and Princeton, he attacks a small British garrison, captures both, and most importantly, he captures their supplies. So now Washington's army is going into the winter not without any supplies. They now have taken some of the British and the German supplies. Yes, sir.
Why is that guy in the picture really short on the red?
Because he's a drummer boy. He's not a full-grown man. Okay. All right. And that's that's why they attacked on the date. It was Christmas. The Hessians were inebriated. Celebratory. Then they go into winter quarters near Morristown, New Jersey. Are you saluting her? Hessians, member of the mercenaries from Hesse, which would be part of what's now Germany. Okay. They go into winter quarters, and like I said, they couldn't fight in the winter. It was almost unheard of. All the way really into World War II, it's almost unheard of because they just didn't have the equipment to move something as large as an army for a long way. Yeah, buddy. Why didn't they attack what? It was Christmas because they were inebriated. It was actually the day before Christmas. Yeah. I just said it to her.
Mercenaries from Hesse.
Part of what's now Germany. Okay. All right, cool. We got it all?
Yes,
Any more questions?
No, sir.
All right, in that case, I'm going to give you some more time today to get your notes into the notebook. Never know when that notebook check is going to be, so you're up on it today. You may shut that up. Goodbye, people.